Okay, we are live. Welcome to the podcast. Welcome, Virag. I want to make sure I'm pronouncing your name correctly. Did I say it right?
You really nailed it. Yes, Virag.
Okay.
Thank you for having me.
It is a pleasure and honor, and it is the second time we are talking because the first time we met at the rally against anti-Semitism in Washington, where you were a speaker. And let me just introduce very briefly those of you unfamiliar with our very esteemed guest, Virag Gulyas. Is that correct? Gulyas?
Gulyas.
Gulyas, okay. Who hails from Hungary and is a loud pro-Israel voice and a proud non-Jewish Zionist who aims to change stereotypes about Israel and the Jewish people. Virag started out actually I did a little research on you. You were a professional ballet dancer, which is very cool. You went on to study international affairs and then served as a diplomat to the EU. And Virag is now a communications consultant and a journalist who just earned her second master's degree in Jewish studies. That is very impressive. I don't know how many Jews have a master's degree in Jewish studies. That's pretty amazing. Virag is well known for her raw, honest blog, which is called The Almost Jewish, and you should definitely read her blog. And she's been working on several high-profile PR campaigns to combat some of the false narratives on Israel. And she's also currently the New York City coordinator for the grassroots movement called End Jew Hatred. Welcome, Virag. It is such an honor and a pleasure to have you here. Tell us what got you started, what inspired you to devote yourself to defending the Jewish people and the state of Israel?
So thank you for the great introduction. I feel really honored to speak with you. And I think I mentioned to you that I read your book. I know about you. I know what MGA is doing. And so it was really a great honor when your colleague reached out to have a talk with you. So to answer your question, it's kind of hard to answer by this time because it's been so long, the last 7 years that I am in this niche. And you mentioned that I'm a pro-Israel activist. That is how I define myself when I started out. Today, I try not to use that because it has such a negative connotation to it. Mm-hmm. When I say pro-Israel, I am automatically labeled as anti-something, and that's usually anti-Palestinian kids, which is obviously not the case. So how I define myself oftentimes nowadays is a common sense activist, which is, a common sense that the Jewish people has the right to self-determination in their land, in Judea and Samaria, in Israel. So that is for me the basic notion where I am coming from. And to try to really answer your question, I'm coming from a rather anti-Semitic background. And everyone always gets a hunch when I say that at speaking engagements, but that's the truth. And it was not an easy label that I had to put on myself, that was my past. Mm-hmm. What I always say is, number one, we are all product of our own environment and the time that we are born into. So I was born in 85. Mm-hmm. Hungary was still under the communist regime. So we didn't have social media back then. We didn't have internet. What did I know about the Jews? What I saw around me, and I heard the Jewish jokes, the Jewish stereotypes. So when you are a 6-7-year-old kid, and this is how you have the upbringing, that's what you hear in society, you grew up with the stereotypical view. And it doesn't make you a horrible person. You are an element, or you are coming from the environment, and you're becoming a product of that.
A product of your environment. And you grew up in in communist Hungary in the 80s, 90s. What switched? What happened in your life that caused you or inspired you to not only, ignore those anti-Semitic or those labels that you grew up hearing about, but becoming an advocate for the Jewish people? I mean, I read your blog. I've watched some of your videos. I listened to your speech in Washington. You're passionate and knowledgeable. What inspired this?
So the easy answer is that I met an Israeli guy while I lived in Brussels. This is where everyone says, oh, okay, so it was love, we understand. Well, if that would be the case, then there would be so many more loud advocates or Zionist voices out there, because so many people fall in love, with an Israeli or a Jew.
Right.
So that was for me definitely the first element in this whole puzzle. Mm-hmm.
Mhm.
That guy is not in my life anymore. And so ironically, actually, I mentioned in my last speech that one of the reasons that we fall out from each other is because I wanted to move to Israel and actually really raise a family that has, even though it's interface at the moment because I have not converted, but still, make them grow up in a Jewish environment. And he did not want that. So
Mhm.
that's the funny story here. But so it started with a guy. He definitely was the first element. He was the one who took me to Israel. This
Uh-huh.
is for me the switching. And really, the moment I arrived at Ben Gurion Airport, something happened that I can't explain. And you can, call it a spiritual, I don't know, enlightenment moment, or Hashem or God is speaking to us, depending on your own beliefs. But for me, that was a really big change when I went to Israel for the first time and spent there 2 or 3 weeks and went from Rosh Hanikra to Elat, through the Galilee, went to Judah and Samaria. And I had to question myself. Why
Mhm.
am I so stereotypical towards the Jews? They are not really horrible people. Like, they welcome me for Shabbat, regardless of their denomination. So the first time I went, I became like a good tourist to Israel, like, oh, the beaches are amazing and Israel is a nice place. But then the more I went back, the deeper this connection grew. And also on an intellectual level, I wanted to understand more. So I think I've been back to Israel during the last 6 years or 7 years, like 20 times.
Wow.
And every time it was like another layer peeling
Mhm.
off from the onion. I started to talk with the soldiers. I started to talk with Arabs in East Jerusalem. I went to, Arab towns with a soldier who actually let me come into certain
Mhm.
areas that are rather dangerous if you are Jewish. So with this perspective, my whole life changed, because then I come away from Israel and I saw the news differently. I started to see what the UN and the EU is doing vis-a-vis Israel. So for me, this whole double standards, again, the Jewish state started to, get more highlighted. And yeah, so the rest is history, but really that was the starting point. And by today, it's not something, and people ask me why I do, honestly, I can't even answer, because it's just something so deep that it became more than just a passion. It is how I live.
Wow. That was a great. I'm sorry, I pulled out of there for a second, but I heard most of what you said. It's amazing. I bring groups to Israel every single summer, and people always ask me, how do you not get bored? I've literally been doing it for over 20 years. And I just love the way you described how each time you came to Israel, you peeled off another layer. And maybe in the first time it was seeing Israel's high tech and Israel's the beautiful beaches on Tel Aviv, but that there's so much more depth spiritually and politically. It just kind of begs the question. I know APAC does this. How much, you know, would you advocate us trying to just get more people to come to Israel? Do you think that would be the best solution, to getting more people that are sucked into the narrative, the negative Israel narrative or the negative Jewish narrative? Because I think they go together today. Would one answer, as far as you're concerned, just, we got to wait for COVID to finish, but get as many people to Israel as possible?
I definitely think that would help. You know, there's barely anything that, for example, we can do on the online world that is going to change perceptions.
Mm-hmm.
When you have a one-on-one conversation with someone, you can start something. But the best is really when people see and experience things for themselves. And it goes both ways. Eventually, it was really the whole thing for me. The blog started as my own self-seeking. I was not trying to publish something. I had no idea what Hasbara is. So the first time someone labeled me as the Hasbara, I had to Google the term. I was such a virgin. So I really just wanted to understand myself. And the almost Jewish also came up, like, that I feel sometimes that I should have been a Jew. So that was the closest term. And then I get a lot of criticism nowadays, from Jews, like, oh, you're either Jew or not. Understand that this is just, kind of quote unquote a branding term that I came up with when I was starting out. So when I get criticism for that, I'm just like, let that be the biggest problem. But to really answer your question, obviously, if we could bring everyone with a stereotypical view against Jews and Israel to actually spend 2 days in Israel, that would be the best way to to create a better future for everyone. But
Yeah.
since that's not possible so far,
Right.
we have to have other tools.
Right. And let's get into some of those other tools. Why do you think there has been such an uptick in anti-Semitism here in New York City? I just spoke for Ernst and Young, which is a big accounting firm, and they asked me to come on to dialogue about anti-Semitism in New York City and what they, as a very large company in this town, could be doing to help their Jewish employees. And I mentioned to them, I because I don't know how many people are familiar with this, I'm sure you are, but that the New York City police commissioner announced months ago that 1/3 of the over 300 hate crimes committed in New York City this year, 2012, were hate crimes against Jews. 1/3. And I'm just wondering, what do you attribute this to? Is there something going on different today, let's say this year, than the last 5 or 10 years that this went up so dramatically? What do you think?
So it's a loaded question, and it has a lot to do with psychology, a lot to do with the COVID situation, but it also obviously with the recent situation in Gaza. I mean, recent in May, we definitely saw a spike. And whenever there is a situation in Israel, anti-Semitism grows and spikes everywhere else. And that is a proven correlation. That is already an injustice towards the Jewish people who live in diaspora, because for example, I don't know, when Jews are responsible for Israel no matter where they live. And even if you are a Jew who doesn't care about Israel, you're going to be targeted because of what's going on in Israel. And this is already such a double standard, because there's no other minority group who's being, targeted for what their quote unquote home country is doing. Most of the American Jews actually have never been to Israel, or they never intend to go to Israel, or they don't speak Hebrew. And yet, whenever there is a situation in Israel, they are being targeted in the US. So there was definitely a correlation in May and in June. And add to that two things. Number one, we were locked down for COVID for almost 2 years, right? And then suddenly came the BLM march, which justified people to go on the street and just exit and let out all their frustration.
Right.
It's also shown that most people who went to the BLM marches did not go because ideologically they wanted to be there, but that was the only legitimate reason to be on the street and gather. So you are facing a very angry society.
Interesting.
Very, very angry society who is ready to do just anything and everything. COVID comes. There you have social media on the other side, which immediately starts blaming Israel for COVID and the Jewish people, because we had the hashtag COVID-48. That was the first trending things after COVID, again, indicating that somehow Jews are responsible for COVID. And then it just escalated. And then when the situation with Gaza happened in May and June, social media went out of order in that sense. Like, there's so much hatred always on social media, but because we were in lockdown, sitting at home, people got even braver. And what happened is that we normalized even more hatred and anti-Semitism and anti-Jewish speech, and really all this violence. We normalized that online. So what happened after is that people went on the street and acted on that. So what you normalize online won't stop online. It's going to go on the street. This is why we had those young guys being attacked in the sushi restaurant in Los Angeles. This is why we had all those Jews being attacked, in Brooklyn.
Yeah.
And we normalized it. And there are zero consequences for Jew hatred. And that is why it's spiking, because it's okay to do that.
And do you think, just going back to something you just touched on, when you talked about that the only way for people to get out during COVID was to attend these rallies. So is that how perhaps the Black Lives Matter movement somehow got polluted, if you will, with this anti-Israel rhetoric? And it wasn't all over the place, but it was there. And it was difficult for a lot of New York Jews, including myself. We wanted to support our African-American brothers and sisters. But then you're at a rally for Black Lives Matter, and there's some, Palestinian sign, anti-Israel going on. Is that how it crept in?
Absolutely, because of intersectionality. That's a very juicy term that again got so perverted. And if you know American history, blacks and Jews always, Jews always helped the black civil rights movement. This is why you wanted as a Jew to be there and support also now the black people. But vice versa, because of the lack of education, it does not happen. So when a black person looks at a Jew, what he sees, not another minority group, but a privileged white supremacist group. And when you talk about the black community, you see an underdog, victimized community. And this is why the two minority groups are not treated the same way. So when Palestinian flags are being flashed all around the BLM marches, it was because of that. They felt that blacks and Palestinians suffer the same way. So let's connect that. And it is an absolutely smart, strategic PR stunt from the Palestinian supporters, which is false ideologically, but most people on the street don't care about that.
They don't care, or that nuance gets lost. Yeah. But what's interesting also, now it helps explain something else, because when I was at Ernst & Young and I shared that 33% of all hate crimes in New York City were against Jews, the people in the room with me, it was an online, we had over 500 people that came online. There's only about half a dozen people in the room with me, and their jaws dropped. And I said, nobody knows this, because for some reason, when there was violence against African Americans and there was violence against Asian Americans, there was a big public outcry. But for some reason, some of our politicians, and I'm not going to get specific, and some of our big celebrities, I'm also not going to get specific, were super quiet about anti-Semitism and were very vocal when it came to Asian American, violence against Asian, as they should have been vocal, and violence against Black Americans. Is that why you think? Is that just the Jew has now become part of the white privileged society, therefore you can't feel bad for them, even if they're being beaten up for their ethnicity?
Again, there is at least 3 points to answer here. One, yes. And Barry Weiss is considered more on the left of the spectrum, right? But if you read her book, I can totally understand what she's saying. And she mentioned this, how Jews are always the rich one, always here. So they are a minority group up on the pedestal, hence the stereotypes. Whereas every other groups, the Asians, the LGBTQ, the blacks, they are always here. So this is why you guys as Jews, as a collective group, are easily hated, even though there are so many Holocaust survivors in New York are living under the poverty line.
Right.
Some of them are really not really living under conditions that nobody should, but nobody thinks about that. So
and just to jump in, I mean, thankfully there are many Asian Americans who are doing very, very well. I mean, I think broadly, I mean, there are many African Americans doing well also, but I guess statistically, it's a little more obvious with the Jew, but it's pretty obvious with the Asian Americans too. I was trying to understand that. I'm trying to wrap my head around all this.
There is really a lot of the prejudice and the stereotypes. And, as someone who is an immigrant to this country, I have one thing to say. The only privilege anybody ever has is to be born to be an American. Because if you are born American, you have so many opportunities, regardless of your race and color and things. I lived in Harlem purposefully. I lived in Harlem for 2 years. I wanted to be there to understand what is this black-white culture that you guys in America have going on, because from where I'm from, we don't really have, an African-American population. So I spent hours with the guys from the housing projects, wanting to understand what's going on. And you understand a lot of the nuances. And they had zero problem me calling them black. They actually liked that. They called me the white girl. So only when you politicize this becomes a problem. So this being said, attacks against Jews, unfortunately, are, as we see in New York, for example, are also not treated as a hate crime. And the moment you are loudly saying that, okay, Jew hatred is something bad, you become a target yourself. For me, being not Jewish, but doing what I'm doing, drives a lot of death threats towards me, closes doors for me in so many aspects of my life. Dating is so challenging that I cannot even, describe, because it's a sensitive thing. It's almost like the first thing I need to mention. I'm actually a Zionist. and it becomes a curse word. And there are
You
guys.
bring that up on the first date?
Of course, for me it's a filter. I mean, I can't. How could I date with someone who is marching with BDS and asking for the destruction of Israel? That just doesn't work. So yeah, unfortunately, we are so polarized, and it should not be. And there is a lot of misunderstanding of vis-a-vis Israel, the term Zionism, and this whole. So for me, Zionism, and I understand where it comes from, and most of you always starts 3,000 years ago, but you lose a generation there because most of us don't even know what happened 2 years ago historically, let alone 3,000 years ago. So what I always say, it's a civil rights movement, and as a Hungarian, I have the right to my own country. Then the Jewish people have the right to their own country.
Sure. And let me thank you. You answered that so beautifully. I have a question now. We could spend a lot of time, and it's easier in a sense, less subtle, white supremacy, the anti-Semitism that comes from the right. We're spending a little time, you and I right now, talking a little about the anti-Semitism that's coming a little more from the left. So I get somebody who's yelling, end the Jewish state, throw the Jews into the sea. I get that's clear and overt, and we're not going to have an issue. The problem that I'm seeing, and I'm wondering, where is the line when you have a celebrity who says, or it's a politician, or it's anyone of influence in our society who says that I have no problem with the Jewish people, I have no problem with the existence of the Jewish state, but what I do have a problem, and I'm just expressing legitimate critique of a sovereign government and the way they're handling the Palestinians, and that they, where is that line of anti-Semitism for someone who doesn't call for the destruction of the Jewish state, but does say that does condemn Israel every time she defends herself against Hamas rocket attacks?
So the moment an influencer calls out Israel, and only Israel, and only Israel, and only Israel, you've got an anti-Semitic problem there. Because you can be an influencer and use your platform for awareness, but then talk about Iran, talk about Iraq, talk about Syria, talk about the persecuted Christian kids that are being massacred today, and nobody talks about that. So the moment you have this obsession and fixation on Israel, you need to question your moral ground. And then there is something off there. Israel can be criticized. Every country can be criticized. But when you cherry pick,
So the word I'm underlining, I'm taking notes when you speak. The word I'm underlining is only. Yeah. Meaning if you are critiquing Israel for these policies and you ignore or say nothing about other countries who have much worse, human rights records and so on and so forth. So what do you do then if, because I mentioned this, that what does it mean if you tell a country they can't fire back? Or if they fire back into population centers because that's where the rockets are coming from. And we can show through Israeli intelligence that the Hamas terrorists are firing rockets from hospitals and mosques and community centers. And the best we can do is drop leaflets and tell everyone to get out of the building. But if we don't fire back, so can you call someone an anti-Semite who says you have no right to fire back because there are children in that building?
Yes. My answer is yes, because you need to question yourself. What would you do? And the problem here again, seriously, the moment we legitimize a terrorist organization as an equal partner to have a dialogue with, we became part of the problem. Because everybody who wants peace, everybody who feels, bad for the Palestinian people at large, need to understand that they're fighting the bad fight when they are pinpointing to Israel. Because everybody, communally, we should have one target, and that is the terrorist organization, that is the leadership. But the moment you justify the action of a terrorist organization, you are part of the problem because you lost your moral compass. It cannot be that terrorists are projected as freedom fighters. It cannot be that Layla Khaled, who hijacked 2 planes, is a hero who is okay to speak at San Francisco State University. These things under a normal, morally led society cannot happen. And again, it doesn't matter what Israel is doing or what not doing and things. We need equal partners, and that should be through democratic leadership. And then we have something to talk about. But we made a huge mistake legitimizing terrorism.
Mm-hmm. Wow. Thank you. You just said something. We need 2 equal powers. I always marvel at the fact that Israel still has a peace treaty with Jordan and with Egypt, and now the peace treaties with under the Trump administration that were developed with some of the Sunni countries. It's an unbelievable thing. How do we get more people to learn history, to be aware of? I'm not even talking about ancient Jewish history. I'm just talking about that in the 1990s, that there were these generous offers on the table, and they weren't perfect, but they were real offers for Palestinian statehood that were rejected outright. President Clinton actually famously in his memoirs wrote that he told Yasser Arafat at the end of the Accords that you'd made me a failure. How do we get more young people today to be aware of the gestures that Israel has made and continues to make, the overtures for peace, the sacrifices that Israel and that most Israelis want the Palestinians to have their own state. They don't want to continue to occupy another people. Well, how do we get that information out there? Because it's obviously getting lost in the sauce.
Yes, I mean, so much noise out there, really. So when you talk about younger kids, let's say we talk about college campuses or even earlier, high school students, you need to humanize the other side as well. So everyone created a political issue about this Israeli-Palestinian, actually it's Israeli-Arab situation. You forgot that there are humans on both sides. And I'm definitely not a kumbaya kind of person. Like, I am becoming more passionate as I age. So when I started in this niche, I was like, you go get it. Like, I was really, really hardcore on that sense. Today, I'm more patient. I'm more, and have more ability to listen, ask questions, trying to understand the other perspective. It's not an easy thing that you are asking, but humanize. You need to, for example, when there was this huge scandal around the Iron Dome, you need to explain, and the people say, yeah, but Israel has the Iron Dome, and how many kids are dying on the Palestinian side, and basically barely any kids die on the Israeli side. Ask the question. But if we would not have the Iron Dome, Israel would not exist anymore. Yeah. So here is a very human example. If your rabbi gets $500,000 and I got $500,000 as a foreign funding or something, and you decide you're going to be the good guy, you decide, to spend it on research and development and come up with ideas like the Iron Dome, and I decide to dig tunnels and teach and have summer camps for kids, teaching them for Jew hatred, why are you to blame for my stupidity? And this is what people don't understand. People always think that Israel gets so much money from America, especially. The Palestinian Authority and Hamas get way more money as foreign fundings and foreign helps. They just decide
from other countries combined.
Yes,
right.
Yes, and they just decide to spend it on something that is destructive and hateful as opposed to something good. So when you go to these kids on college campuses, also,
so how do we that last point, Virag, how do we get the world to know how the Palestinian Authority, the Palestinian leadership, I don't mean Palestinian people are people. Sure. And I know that there are good Palestinian people on the other side, but the leadership has just been how do we get the world to know how they're spending the billions of dollars that continue to pour in to their governments, to their political establishments, whatever we want to call them. But why is that not better known?
It's let alone that it's not better known, but even when people are never going to understand, how is it more appealing for people, especially in college campuses, for example, to join groups that are okay with violence as opposed to joining groups that are opening up for dialogue? And if you ask me, it's all a lot of psychology on college campuses and high schools, because you want to be part of the cool kids club. And today, the cool kids are the ones who are anti-Zionist, anti-democracy, anti-sovereign countries, anti-everything that is, quote unquote, leads to some kind of moral life. Being a cool kid today is joining the pro-Palestinian groups, joining, everything that is destructing the current system. And as a young person, we always want to, question the society we are living in. So that's good.
Right.
But we perverted terms, and kids today have such a lack of knowledge because they get drip drops of information, especially on TikTok, on Instagram, on Facebook. They don't know the depths and the nuances. So another aspect to this is that this generation, especially in the US, grows up without a general understanding of why they live for. What I mean by is that I was still born into a communist regime, and even though I was young but the Russians already left, I still grew up under a society that was very oppressive in a way. So I had a goal in life. First and foremost, be able to travel, be able to speak English, which was not given to my parents. American kids at my age, and I'm generalizing, their biggest question is what kind of car to get after I graduate from high school. So they are missing the moral challenges that would make them grow. So they feel that if they join a pro-Palestinian group, for example, and they stand against Zionism, which is such a horrible term, they get some kind of fulfillment. They become better people morally. That's their thinking. We belong. We help the underdog. We help the victims. They're not going to go into the details of history or question their own views on that. They want to be the cool kids.
Wow. Well, I want to ask you one last question, if that's okay. First of all, this has been incredible, and you are so knowledgeable, and you come to this whole issue with a fresh perspective, just from your own unique, background. I'm going to ask you a question now as a rabbi. We've been talking a lot of politics and perception. One of the things that I've devoted my life to, and you read my book, is trying to demonstrate the profundity, the beauty, and the brilliance of Judaism, because I feel that in order to really inspire people to take their Judaism more seriously, to be more committed, and as a result, be more positive about Israel, okay, they need to have more Jewish pride. And I can give you a whole 2-hour discourse why I don't think, why young people today are not growing up with a lot of Jewish pride. What do you think, from your perspective, would inspire more Jewish pride, more interest for a young Jewish professional living in New York City or wherever to study more about their heritage, to learn more about their history, to be more devoted to Israel? What do you think it would take based on your experience? And I know, by the way, I know this is a tough question because I'm specifically asking. I don't get to interview people who are not Jewish, but so passionate about Judaism. And so this is an opportunity for us to hear from someone not of our own people who clearly are, is inspired, and passionate about Judaism. How do we get our own to be more?
I'm going to answer with something that might trigger you, but this is not purely a Jewish issue. I know I am not a practicing Christian. I was baptized because I was a baby. Nobody really asked me. I left church when I was 14. So I want to put it out there because in America, it's a delicate thing. Oh, a non-Jewish Christian, you're probably evangelical or messianic. I didn't know those terms, so I'm not that. But every religions are losing their people, losing their youngsters. And when you talk about pride, the current generation and the one that is really growing up now in high schools, they are not proud of anything. They are not proud of being an American. They are not proud of their own flag. They are not proud of their own national anthem. So again, this is like, they just want to revolt against everything. Hence also Judaism. For them, it seems like an archaic something, again, from 3,000 years ago. I think where you are doing a great job is to make Judaism translatable and manageable for this contemporary life that we are living. That I know that you're using social media and you're using it very, very nicely.
Thank you.
I really think that the moment, and also like Jewish pride is very delicate, especially in New York, because the moment you are a proud Jew, you become a target. You become a target. And this is why many people go to college campuses and talk to those kids. Don't talk there. Talk in the high school. Because if those kids in the high school has already a very strong Jewish identity, then they're not going to be broken down in college, and they're not
college. Yes.
So
Although a lot of Jewish day school graduates who go to secular colleges are intimidated. They're not so well trained how to take on a pro-Palestinian activist. But I want to go back to something that you said earlier, and that is that you're saying that this is not a Jewish issue per se. It's something that the church is dealing with. This is that a lot of religious groups, because young people today are not getting excited about the things that about patriotism, about their faith. These are kind of things look like they're passé. And you said something earlier before, which is that they do want to feel fulfilled. I know this from my own students. I absolutely adore, and you're always welcome to come, Virag, to MJE. I know whenever you're in New York City, you know you have an open welcoming to come. But I love my students. They're in their 20s and 30s. They're Jewish, but not terribly, affiliated or committed observance-wise. Some were raised in the Orthodox world, most were not. But everyone's looking for meaning. Everyone's looking for purpose. Now, you just said a few minutes ago, people are finding meaning and purpose by embracing the underdog, right? And not by embracing the love of their country, the love of their religion. And I think that's a really important thing for us to hear, that it's not like something going wrong within the Jewish people per se. It's a millennial, I guess, issue.
Yeah, and the Generation Z and all that comes after, it's even harder. Everyone wants to be a global citizen, and you see these videos today that nobody needs a house, nobody needs a flat, nobody needs a job, you just need to travel and be a free-spirited hippie in that sense, which is beautiful, but eventually it backfires on us. Because everybody needs a grounding. Everybody needs to believe in something. If you ask me, I don't even believe that people can be atheist. I don't believe that concept exists, because you might not believe in God, but you believe then in yourself. And your self-belief is basically believing in God. So when people say, oh, I'm an atheist, you really cannot be an atheist, because you always believe in something. You just name it differently,
I've been saying that for years.
Really? Okay, then I didn't hear from you.
I've been saying that for years, that, if what is it about you that you believe in? Yeah. If it's just a physical part of you, the way you look, the way you sound, how much money you make, and it's not something deeper. And what is it that is, deeper? What is it that's beyond the physical? All right. And that's all inspired by God. That's where religion comes in. So I don't think you can escape it. And I think if you keep pushing people, intellectually even, where are you going with this? How are you going to find meaning and purpose? It does come down to seeing ourselves as not just bodies, but also souls.
Right. And, maybe actually this might be an answer how we can motivate more young people to come to Judaism, for example. Whenever I have a hard time nowadays, I look up a rabbi. And I find so much meaning, and it usually calms me down. And I sometimes I really wish I would have grown up in like a Jewish environment. I feel like I would have found my contentment earlier than now. But that's my own personal journey. But when people are today so much into this manifestation, law of attraction, law of this, actually, this is also what Judaism is about. The whole spirituality, that you say thank you before you feel it. You say thank you before it comes to you. This is the whole thing. You believe in God before it appears in front of you. Yeah. So, if you translate these things into a contemporary, very trendy, very viral language, eventually people think that they are against Judaism or against religion. They are doing the same. They just, switch the words.
By the way, I'll just tell you a beautiful thing that you just touched on. Rabbi Jonathan Sachs, of blessed memory, said that, the first prayer that we say when we arise in the morning, we say the Modeh Ani prayer. So he asked the question, if you look at the Hebrew, it really should say, Ani modeh, I thank you. But it's backwards. You're talking about changing the words. It's Modeh Ani, thank you, because we don't want the first word that comes out of our mouth in the morning to be me. It should be thank you. And I think these types of messages are, I think, I see this in my work, are what people are looking for today to find meaning and purpose. And we just have to do a better job of getting that information out there and of trying to show people that believing in your country, when your country stands for the right things, not everyone's country does. And believing in your faith system, assuming that you believe in its tenets, can really help create a more meaningful and purposeful existence. And simply running after the new movement, that's the rage, because that's what everyone's saying and doing without considering the facts and looking at the history, is just, that's really where we're at today.
And if you allow me, like, one closing statement on that, basically, I always say when people ask me, how can I, change something? Not everybody needs a master's degree in Jewish studies. Not everybody needs to rally on the streets. Not everybody needs to become a journalist or whatever. But we all have a role to take part in bettering the future. So maybe invite your neighbor for a Shabbat dinner. And you're going to be surprised that one Shabbat dinner, when you explain to them what it is and how it is done, you're going to change that one neighbor of yours. And that's enough, because that's going to be a ripple effect.
Yeah.
I really, really believe, and where we started off, that I am coming from a rather anti-Semitic upbringing, that was pure ignorance. That was not hatred. That was ignorance. So you have at least two big categories of anti-Semitic remarks. One comes from ignorance. The other one is a conscious hate. Don't deal with the conscious hate. That's like an advanced level. But if you want to do something in your neighborhood, then if someone gives you an anti-Semitic remark, educate that person. Don't assume that person actually wanted to say something bad. Probably doesn't know any better. Ask, or do you know that actually that was hurtful to me, what you said? And this is what the LGBTQ community did perfectly, and the Black community. They educated you. So today saying something so they educated you on everything, that hurts me because of this. You cannot say this because of that. Yes, it goes into wokeism and goes out of control at one point, but the intention was good.
Yeah.
And this is what I think the Jewish community should do. Embrace a little bit more and don't assume the bad immediately. Don't cancel out people immediately. Give them at least 3 chances. If all the 3 chances, they come across anti-Semitic, we got some problems. But the first 2 occasions, give them the benefit of doubt. We are humans.
Beautiful. What a great message. Thank you so much, Virag. I really appreciate your time and your intelligence. Virag's blog is called The Almost Jewish. She's all over social media, and you should just Google her, check her out, and just continue, to listen. And I invite you anytime to MGE. It would be an honor and pleasure. We should really hire you as one of our educators. You're so inspired and inspiring to listen to you. And I thank you. I don't represent the Jewish people, obviously, but on behalf of MJE, we thank you for your love and for your passion, standing up for Israel and for the Jewish people, and doing it in a way that really is inclusive and can bring other people in and give other people, as you say, a chance.
I really appreciate all your amazing questions, and you keep me awake after 3 hours of sleep. So I need to put it as a disclaimer. I am so pregnant. I had to remind myself today that today is Monday. I've been after conferences and still at a conference now, actually on a lunch break. So I hope I could actually, convey the message that I wanted.
You did beautifully. Thank you. Thank you. I really appreciate it. Get some sleep.
Thank you so much. Bye.
Thank you. Take care.
Thank you. Bye.